would wrap up your conversations, finish sharing with one another. All right, folks, we're going to invite some volunteers who would like to share out to the whole group, if you want, either about how that felt to have someone listen to you about your money story, or if you want to share any particulars about what thoughts occurred to you in this exercise.
How about this?
Ooh, yes.
Leah Purcell, Albany, New York, and I just want to lift up that so many of us here are women and of different generations, but a lot of mine. And I think that the thing that I found a commonality with my partner is that growing up, our financial situation was tied to the marital status of our mothers.
Yes.
I'm Lynn. Whoa, this is really on. I'm Lynn Marshall from Concord, New Hampshire. And it was kind of, I almost stood up earlier, but I feel so confused about money as I listen to people who have struggled. I never have struggled. My family has money. My mother was married. There are family resources from past generations that have accrued that I get to live off. And I feel so much shame and guilt and confusion as I don't earn enough through the work I do to be living the way I am. And so am I rich? Am I poor? How do I make sense of money when I have access to definitely more than I need, but it's not money that I've earned? So I just want to name that for anybody else in the room who is in that situation of being on the rich side of things.
Thank you for naming that. We all have different stories here, and we're inviting a safe space for all of them.
So I'm just really glad we're talking about this. Really glad. I was telling my partner, like, I feel like this is even harder to talk about than race. And we all know how hard race is to talk about. Like, that should say something. For me, I won't tell my whole story, obviously, but I grew up in a family where what's yours is mine, mine is yours. And not only did we know that we could count on each other when we had what we could give, but we never had to see the result of something we borrowed. We never saw each other suffer. Nobody would ever let you know by their facial expression if you asked for money that it was an inconvenience. Like, they were happy to give it to you. And so as I grew up, and I eventually learned in middle class, upper middle class culture, that's not the way you want to be seen. I didn't have a language to ask for help, and I developed a tendency to always want to hide what became weakness to me. And so it has become about a lot more than money. It's about appearances. It's about, just not appearing weak, not ever needing help. And in this profession, that's been a real challenge for me because I am trying to help congregants to do what I know they came to church to do, which is to feel connected and feel like part of a family. Well, one of the things that makes you able to do that is you feel safe. You don't have to have these secrets. And so I have had to really allow myself to trust colleagues and coworkers and even supervisors to tell them what's going on in my life personally and be a person so that I can help the people that I'm supposed to help and not think that I'm supposed to be, superhuman compared to them. I'm not supposed to have any problems or any issues. So anyway.
Yes. Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Pat in the back. Okay. Over here first.
Deb Weiner. One of the things that occurs to me about these questions, which are very good ones, is that it was, at least for me, difficult to separate from the attitudes that I had about money as a child and a youth, and then to assume life as an adult and recognize that there wasn't going to be that same responsibility on the part of others for what was going on in my life, that I truly had to own it. And I think that that is a struggle. And then if one is in a relationship with another person, as I am, to recognize that what my husband grew up with is very different from what I grew up with. And so how do we come to some kind of place if we're going to join our resources and our values that will work for both of us? And sometimes it is a long road to get to that place.
Absolutely. Yeah, the money stories that come together to pool their money in one common source, now you have to unpack those stories that came and where you're going to intentionally move forward. Absolutely.
Hi, I think this will start working in a second. Has the light on? Hello? Hello? Yeah?
It's in.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Hunter. I'm from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I guess for me, as I've grown into adulthood and kind of grappled with money as an adult, I've realized more and more the importance of financial safety net in my own life, and how important that was for my parents as well. I grew up without much money in our own family, but my grandparents had money. And what that meant was that when we did get into a place of some crisis, my parents had this fallback, and that was huge in their life. And it really, it sort of maintained a feeling of security when there was struggle present as well. And that has been true for my life as well. And I think that that's true for the community that I live in quite a bit. That there is, even if your own family doesn't necessarily have a ton of wealth, that extended family and the support of extended family who are there to catch you creates this mentality of it's safe to take risk. And that is not a mentality that everyone shares. And I don't think that people always realize the power of that. And it definitely comes up in explorations that I have been in about racial justice and that history in our country. And it definitely came up when we did work this year and over the past several years working with a community in Appalachia that we have been doing service work with, where the lack of accrued wealth over generations has this effect on your mentality as well as your living circumstances. It has an effect on how much you're able to sort of take a jump or take a risk because you don't have someone there to catch you. And those of us who do often don't realize how powerful that is in your money story. So I just wanted to hold that up.
Amen. Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, in my own story, if I didn't have grandparents who were much more stable than my parents, I wouldn't be as well off today as I am.
I'm Rowan Van Ness. I am in Boston, Massachusetts. And one of the things that I was reflecting on as someone who is raised Unitarian Universalist and having a family, and I think the thread of my own family's ideas around money as well, is this idea of what is the balance between individualism and our reliance on community? What is the balance between our first and our seventh principles? And how does that relate to our theology around money? And in particular, this was really striking to me a couple weeks ago when one of my congregants, who's a younger father, brought up that he and his wife feel so strongly that if anything happened to them, that the congregation would be there to take care of their children. And it made me wonder, would the congregation be really there to take care of their children? And what does that actually mean? And what does that actually look like? And so who are the people we can actually rely upon, and what are we willing to give and to do for them, and how vulnerable are we willing to make ourselves both to help other people, but also to be helped.
Hi, my name is Tim Atkins, and when I was 10, my father passed away. So we went from being pretty well off financially to needing Social Security checks to pay for groceries. And I just remember, so something that my family taught me is that when we have money, we don't talk about it. But when we don't have money, we have to talk about it.
Hmm.
I'm Marguerite Mills, Nashville, Tennessee, and I had a little bit of an aha moment here. And it's going to take a lot of processing, but it has something to do with the basic tenet that part of being a leader is allowing yourself to be vulnerable with others. Part of it has to do with some of the really good conversations we're just starting to have about class issues. And for me, it has to do with the way that I grew up with a great lack of money security. And that it's not just anxiety I feel, but actual fear. And so my takeaway is to think about how to talk with my congregation when I'm bemoaning the fact that I'm not paid what I should be, and explain to them that I'm not money hungry, that there's something else going on here, and that this needs to be acknowledged and addressed just as it does in their lives.
Michelle Grove, and I'm living in Sisseton, South Dakota. And Rowan, I've never met you yet, but you said something that just spurred an interesting thought. Back in 1989, I started a relationship with the people on the United States-Mexico border through the organization Borderlinks. And through that relationship, spent a lot of time in the Maquiladora sections in the squatters communities and all of that of Nogales, so on the other side of Tucson, Arizona. Through that time, the greatest moment in my life was when, after 2.5 weeks of living in the squatters communities with these families, thinking about my own middle class, even upper middle class wealth, and being with them, I left knowing how poor I really was and how rich they were, because their sense of community is a richness that we have lost in our culture. And in that, I was ready, if I could, but family made it difficult, to give my money away just so I could somehow experience that kind of richness. And I've spent every day since then trying to get to that barriers within our own culture keep us from doing. We have compartmentalized ourselves in such amazing ways, and we are isolated, and because of that, sometimes very lonely. So thank you for this conversation, which might break that barrier a bit.
Thank you, Michelle.
My name is Pat Ellenwood, and as I sat and talked with Scott and listened to Elizabeth talk and heard others talk about the value of religious education, I just want to hold up that what Marguerite said and others have said, and that intense need to align what we value with what we spend. And every LREDA conference I've been to and every GA, leaders stand up and say, religious education is absolutely fundamental to our faith. And then when it comes time to do compensation and line items in a budget, somehow there's a disconnect. And so it's an old phrase, and I think it comes from the era of rock and roll, which was part of my youth. But we need to begin to walk the talk. And we're not the ones that can do it alone. We are the educators. We can educate our congregations, and we can educate others, leaders in our congregations. But I think that's what connected what Elizabeth said earlier and what Sarah has said now is we have to make ourselves part of the solution to this disconnect that I think is
And
so profound.
Pat, after lunch, be sure you're back here because that is what we're going to be talking about. Two more.
I'm so grateful for these conversations. I'm Elizabeth Wynn. I really loved the framing of what is religious or what is spiritual about these questions, because I think it reminds me that a big part of this is practice. I came into speaking very honestly about money, not out of my own free will, but because it was my job as someone who was training youth around class and classism. So I walked into this job and they're like, okay, so what's your story of class and money? And now tell it to 200 private school students who want to learn about economic justice. So I got very good at saying I went to Harvard Divinity School and both my parents have been homeless at different times. I will always have an upper class background because of the private schools I went to, even though at times I've been denied surgery that I needed because I didn't have the health insurance to pay for it. And those were really scary things to say, especially to a bunch of high school, private school students. But it really helped me realize that a practice of honesty around money, which is so countercultural, as so many of you have shared, can really open new ways of thinking and new ways of being. And I don't think if I hadn't had that all right, it's your job, go do it, I would have really shied away from that practice. But I've been just so grateful that I did have that because it's helped me to grapple with my own spiritual path and also to be a better member of community.
Thank you. Yeah. We have time for one more. In the back. It's a race to Aisha.
Oh my God. How generous, yes. Thank you. Amplify it. So I just want to make a gentle suggestion. This is the part of me that was the former diversity and inclusion chair, and the part of me that grew up for 2 years when my mother left my father, immigrant mother. I'm an immigrant and was on welfare in a roach-infested apartment outside Newark, New Jersey. Please be mindful not to exoticize the poor. It is easy to say the poor are really rich. I would have preferred not to live in a roach-infested apartment and have paper food stamps and can afford, I was telling my partner that my kids don't get how great it is we can afford shrimp. I had shrimp twice a year. It was a big flipping deal. They don't care. They don't even like it. I'm like, no, you have to like it. We can afford it now. So just be mindful. I get it, but this is part of true diversity work is just don't exoticize Native Americans. Please don't exoticize being poor because we criminalize the poor in our country and we treat them like crap. So please be mindful of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Aisha. Well, we have been exploring our stories up until now around money, but of course the story doesn't end right now. We're all going to walk out of these doors and move forward still with a relationship with money. And so I invite you to do an exercise that is meant to help you see where you currently are sending your money. This will be in your journal, and it's called a money map because it's like asset mapping, or it's like mind mapping, or any of those exercises that we engage in. You can do this any visual way you want. I just do bubbles because I'm not particularly artistic, and so I'm just going to do a bubble for each thing when I do this myself. You can do pictures. You can do an actual map of your local town and the bank where you send your car payment, or your landlord who gets your rent check. However you want to do this. But for the next 5 minutes, you're going to draw a picture realistically right now as you live your life today. Where does your money go? 5 minutes for that.